Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're new to this session, what we do here is we will be recapping what's been happening over the last week or two in the world of solar. And then I'll try and highlight some of the events that are coming up in the next week or two. And then we go into a deep dive on all things solar, something of interest. And this week, we're going to be looking at space-based solar. Is that a thing? Is it just hype? So we'll dive into that. Usually it's just some topic comes along. I get recommendations from some of the viewers and the like, or people who are part of this conversation. And I should just point out there are folks online, so we hopefully will get some interaction as we undertake this in case you're watching it on the video. So that said, let's go ahead and jump into the news for the week of May 6th. After an unprecedented power outage hit Spain and Portugal and parts of France last week, many in the media immediately started speculating that this was because there was a significant amount of the power coming from a renewable energy that was to blame for this blackout. The exact cause of the grid collapse is not yet known, but at 12:33 p.m., early afternoon local time on April 28th, the electricity generation in Spain dropped rapidly from about 27 gigawatts down to 12 gigawatts. And that sudden drop in grid load destabilized the electricity flows, and that resulted in a peninsula-wide power outage. At the time of the incident, Spain and Portugal were sourcing about 80% of their electricity from wind and solar, which led to the speculation that renewable energy was the cause for this power outage. Now, wind and solar are, of course, known to be intermittent power sources, so more intermittent anyway than fossil fuels. And so, but the consensus amongst the grid experts is that the generation source, regardless of what it was, had nothing to do with this week's blackout. The Spanish utility issued a statement that read in part, "It's important to emphasize that there is no reliable or verified information suggesting that the failure that led to the widespread blackout was caused by any generation technology. The electrical grid and the generating plants are separate elements. The disconnection of renewable plants or other generating systems, such as nuclear plants, was not the cause of the blackout. The causes are yet to be determined." So that's pretty final, I would say there, although a little bit weird. We don't know what the cause is, but we know that's not the cause. I guess that's consistent. All right, in 2016, Australia suffered a similar blackout when about 850,000 customers throughout South Australia were left without power for nearly 8 hours. It was determined that the loss of a portion of the transmission infrastructure created a frequency imbalance within the grid, and then this had a cascading result in wider power outages. The Australian utility responded by adding a substantial amount of battery storage to the grid. And that was important because, unlike other traditional generating facilities such as coal, gas, wind, and solar, the batteries can instantaneously adjust the amount of power that's going onto the grid or coming or that's not going onto the grid to adjust for these frequency fluctuations in real time. And in doing so, lessen the risk of a cascading power outage. All right, nearly all newly constructed homes in the United Kingdom, see, we've got a European theme going on here, will be required to install rooftop solar panels under the new Labour government's proposed net zero regulations. According to the reports in the Guardian newspaper, solar panels will need to be fitted on most new homes within 2 years of the start of construction. The new policy will add roughly $5,000 to the cost of a new home, and but will save about $1,300 annually in the homeowner's energy bills. In the US, California is the only state that requires solar panels on all new homes. The mandate, which took effect in January of 2020, applies to most new residential buildings and is part of that state's push towards clean energy. Other states, including Colorado, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Texas, are actually all considering similar requirements. The US Department of Energy, or the DOE, is entertaining the idea of using federal lands for artificial intelligence data center development, along with co located power generation facilities. This month, the DOE's Office of Policy released an RFI, or a request for information, seeking to learn more about using 16 federal research facilities to support the growing demand for data centers. Each site would incorporate an on-site energy generation facility, which would be facilitated through new fast-track permitting rules. The decision to explore federal lands for data centers follows an executive order that was signed in January by outgoing President Joe Biden that sought to remove hurdles for AI data center expansion within the US, and the order also encouraged these customers to power their systems through renewable energy. President Trump has not rescinded this order, in fact, has chosen to expand upon it. A report released by the DOE last year estimated that electricity needed in the US from data centers tripled over the last decade and will double or triple again over the next 3 years. So by 2028, data centers will likely consume up to 12% of all of the electricity that's consumed within the nation. And many experts agree or anticipate that the power industry load demand growth will increase by about 50% over the next 5 years, so that by 2030, we will see, current demand and then a 50% on top of that. And this is being pushed in large measure by the advent of AI within data centers, the electrification of the automobile industry, the advancement of cryptocurrency, which is quite an energy hog, as well as the onshoring of a lot of the manufacturing, plus the electrification of those manufacturing activities. Polling of 1,000 likely voters by the organization Conservative Texans for Energy Innovation found that 91% of Texans strongly supported landowners' ability to use wind and solar on their own land and to lease their land for renewable energy to utilities. The findings come as the Texas renewable industry is under legislative assault. The Texas Senate just recently passed two bills, Senate Bill 819 and Senate Bill 388, that restrict landowners' ability to put wind and solar on their land and require that every new watt of renewable energy added to the grid must be matched by a watt that comes from coal or natural gas. The poll also found that 75% of Republicans and 90% of independents favored governmental actions to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. Found that significant because we think that this is still a political divide, but this poll is showing that there's very widespread across the political spectrum support for renewable energy. The new poll provided similar results as a 2024 poll by CEA, the Solar Energy Industry Association, that found that 89% of Texans felt property owners should have the right to lease their land for solar projects. And that's the news that I came across this week in the solar industry. Does anyone who's online have anything they want to add to that? Anything that came across your desk? Feel free to jump in at any point. I'll just keep plugging along till I hear somebody shout at me. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the announcements of what's happening, webinars and the like. I'm going to adjust my screen size so I can actually see. All right, so May 7th, I guess that's tomorrow, GrowWatts is going to have one of their webinars with Renvu that talks about inverters and their storage system. These are usually very proprietary in nature, but they're good. They're good, so you can find out about a product. May 7th at 2 p.m., Tools for Growth. This is really for contractors. May 15th, AI in solar, what to expect. That's at 2 p.m. All these times are Eastern time, so and you can find them online rather than me giving you links there. There is a physical conference. Surprise, surprise, these things still happen. May 19th through the 22nd, and Clean Power Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. Somebody just asked if the Texas bill was signed into law or if it was just proposed. My understanding is that Texas bill has passed the Senate, but still has to go to the House and then to the governor for his signature. So it's in process. May 29th, field inspections and modular failures. That's at noon. And that's a webinar course. Another webinar, June 3rd, residential solar sales, if you're in that business. And then another conference, June 9th through the 11th, the Midwest Solar Expo in Chicago. And then, of course, our shameless plug for the online courses and our face-to-face courses at solarpvtraining.com. And that's what I've got. Once again, I'll just open it up to the world here and see if you've got any questions or any events or anything that came to mind while I was rambling through all of that. Give you just a second there. Nope. Okie doke. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the topic, and I will hope that we get some discussion on this because I get tired of listening to my own voice. So anyway, so the question came across because folks often through the week send me articles and they send me information about what they ran across, and one of them was an article about space-based solar. Excuse me. And we hear about this periodically. It's that concept that just won't die. So, but before I get into that, let me also mention that this webinar, this session does qualify for half an hour of CEUs through ETA International for their solar certification. So if you're certified, go ahead, you can count this and hey, there you go. You're almost there. All right, so what is space-based solar? And this is one of those technology concepts that a lot of people have heard about, may not know exactly what it is. It's kind of interesting because I actually, it comes up more frequently than you would imagine. In fact, I was at a dinner at a professor's house down in Athens, Ohio, a while back. And of course, when they find out I'm interested in solar, then he was all into the whole idea, the concept of space-based solar. And of course, my flippant response is, you know what? We've already got space-based solar. It's called the sun, So that's, and then they don't want to hear that. But so let's talk about what they really mean by space-based solar. And it really is at its simplest. It's the concept of sending satellites up into space, creating large solar arrays in orbit, collecting the rays from the sun, and then beaming them down to planet Earth to some sort of collector. So that's at its most basic. And the reason for this, the rationale for this, is, well, in outer space, you've got a lot of advantages in collecting solar. It's more intense. The solar constant, the amount of energy in a square meter of sunlight, is around 1,360, if I remember right, watts per square meter, where typically the best you're going to get in full sunlight at the Earth's equator, at the surface of the Earth, is going to be somewhere around 1,000 watts per square meter. So you lose about 30% of the sunlight that comes to Earth it's absorbed within the atmosphere. It's reflected off into outer space. That's one reason you can see Earth from outer space, is because some of the light is reflecting out. So we lose about a third of that energy. It never actually penetrates our atmosphere and gets to the surface. So, and then you've got weather issues that are out there. You've got clouds. You've got nighttime, which is difficult for the world of solar. So if we just put these satellites out in orbit, we avoid all of that problem. We've got a ready 24/7 stream of sunlight, and then all we have to do is beam that stuff down to a collector on Earth. So that's the concept. That's the concept of what that is. It actually breaks into two subcategories of how this would be accomplished. And we'll go into greater detail on this here in a minute. But there is laser, where you're basically going to collect it and then shoot it down in the form of a laser. And then there is, and that laser could be visible light laser, it could be infrared. Then there's microwave. And microwave is the other one. That's more often what is discussed, but both of these are concepts and they have advantages and disadvantages in relationship to each other. All right, so that would be the microwave one. Again, I don't want to go too deep into it because I will go in a little bit more, but there's big panels up here, and then it is converted, the visible light is converted into microwave energy, and then it's beamed down to Earth to a receiver, a receiving station of some sort, and then that receiving station converts that microwave energy back into electricity, and then it's generated onto the grid, and it can go to service households. In the laser, it's more a tightly packed beam, and it goes again to a receiver, and then it goes through that same process. It's converted into electricity and then used. So the history of this concept goes back a fair way. Really, the first acknowledged discussion about taking space-based solar and turning it into land-based energy came from the short book 1941 by Isaac Asimov called Reason. So in which he proposed the concept of just collecting solar radiation and beaming it down to Earth. It was 1973 when a scientist, Peter Glaser, proved that this could happen, right? He actually transmitted power through microwaves from one generator to a receiver. And then from 1978 to 1986, the Department of Energy and NASA really spent a lot of time and money exploring this concept. Is this something that could be done? They eventually just dropped it because they figured technology's not there, the costs are prohibitive, let's just drop it. Then it raised its head again in 1997. NASA started what they called their Fresh Look study to look at it and say, okay, well, the world has changed since 1986 when we dropped this. Is this a concept that we could explore today? And they did. So then there have been continued work on it, continued experiments. This is kind of text dense, but basically what they did is in 2023, so it wasn't until 2023, we actually started to get experiments where microwave was converted into energy between two ground antennas that were about 1 kilometer apart. And then in 2023, they launched a satellite into orbit to test the laser concept. Doesn't sound like a great success to me. They got 1.5 watts to travel 2 meters. I think I could do that by throwing a light bulb or something. But and the system was only 11% efficient. So this is difficult. And then that same year, Caltech, actually in 2024, they sent a satellite up into orbit, and they were able to send earthward a very small amount of energy, as they say here, too meager to power even a light bulb. Well, what does that mean? But a little bit of energy, it's a start. I mean, that's kind of the concept. We could poo-poo the idea because the technology isn't there yet, but we could have been poo-pooing every technological idea through the history of time if we decided to take that approach. But it does point out that even today, this is a concept only, right? We're just not there technologically. Very early stages, you know. So then, as part of this study, I just found it interesting. This quote from one of the NASA directors basically says space-based solar is about 5 orders of magnitude more expensive than solar power from the Arizona desert, with the major cost being the transportation of the materials to orbit. So what does he mean by 5 orders of magnitude? Essentially $2 a watt versus $200,000 a watt. So this is the numbers we're currently looking at. If I wanted to put a large solar array out into the Arizona desert, for example, you're going to be looking at about $2 a watt. So is the advantage of 24/7 power worth 100,000 times more? That's what we're going to have to sort of debate here. And the proponents of this concept would come back and say, sure, yeah, it's expensive now, but costs keep coming down, and we're going to it'll eventually become affordable relatively affordable. That would be their argument. I would maybe counter by saying you're assuming everything else stays the same. It's like the enemy gets a say in this. Land base is also going to be coming down. So my guess is if it's 5 orders of magnitude, it's probably going to remain 5 orders of magnitude, just different starting points. But maybe not 5, maybe 4, maybe 3, but it's still significant difference. So I don't want to I'm going to tip my hand. I think it's a dumb idea, but but it doesn't go away, right? This is the article that was sent to me that sort of prompted this discussion. This one here in Popular Mechanics: China is building a solar station in space that could generate practically endless power. So this is the concept that's out there. This is the headlines that you're going to hear. It just reminds me a lot of hydrogen power. I like to say hydrogen power is the energy of the future, and it always will be. It's always 10 years off in the future. It's always 15 years off in the future, and this is always going to be 25 years off in the future. This is the dream. This is the goal. And somebody's going to get a lot of money to research it from probably from government, of course, because private investors, I don't think they're that dumb yet. But anyway, because it's their money, So, all right, so let's dig a little bit deeper into this. So where do these satellites go? Just from the technology, and they're very different systems. If you go with a microwave system versus going with a laser system. So the laser system is designed to be in orbit about 250 miles off the surface of the Earth. The microwave system, and to give you a sense of that, what is 250 miles? Well, if we look at this objects in Earth, it's right about where the International Space Station is. Right in that range, 250 miles or so, a little bit lower in orbit than Starlink. So, and then other satellites are usually running in a bit higher orbit, but it's still a low Earth orbit, going around the Earth. And I should point out that these laser systems are actually much smaller than the microwave system. They envision it, you can sort of think of it like a Starlink system, a lot of small satellites that are linked together in some sort as a cluster, essentially. Now the microwave is actually at 35,000 kilometers, or that's about 22,000 miles. This is what they call geostationary orbit. So this is quite a ways out from the Earth. One of the reasons for that is in low Earth orbit, these things do fall into the shadow of the Earth. They're still subject to nighttime, not 12 hours of nighttime, but they're still subject to nighttime. So getting them further out is helpful because essentially they're going to be up 99.9% of the time. They're going to have sun hitting them. Apparently, there are a couple of times during the equinoxes or the solstices, I don't remember which, where there is a bit of shadow that cast on it. But for all practical purposes, it's in sunlight all of the time. But it is quite a ways out there, a good deal out there. So how does the microwave system work? As we said, you've got these great huge solar arrays that have to be constructed in space, right? They have to be they can be all the bits set up there, but they've got to be because they're huge. I mean, really big. And then they have a transmission where they convert that energy into microwave energy. Microwaves will then radiate down to a very large collector, a receiving station. That microwave energy is then converted into AC electricity and then put onto the grid. One of the significant things about this is that receiving station basically means this is not something that is mobile. Like I can't send energy to where I need it. It's a fixed power plant. It's going to go to a fixed receiver. It has very little flexibility from that standpoint. The laser, different world, different thing. So again, I'm still trying to give you advantages before I sort of dump stuff all over this argument, but it's 24/7 power. I mean, that's kind of what led everybody to this discussion. It's out there in the sunlight all the time. The intensity, somebody was just in chat asking about that. They're saying, what about harmful microwave radiation as it's coming down through the atmosphere? Well, they claim, and I'm always a bit skeptical about claiming these things because these are the same guys who sprayed DDT and let kids run behind the fog back in the 50s, and said everything's safe and you can drink this stuff. So they're claiming that the intensity of this is the same as the midday sun, no more or less than that. Probably if exposed long enough, just like the midday sun could cause some health problems, but they're claiming it's relatively safe. And the large receivers can receive large amounts of power that can be then fed in. They kept making references to 1 gigawatt systems that could power very large cities. So the way this is envisioned, you've got this satellite up in geostationary orbit. It's going to be beaming these microwaves down to this receiving station, and that's going to cleanly power major cities. So that's the dream. That's what's out there. The big disadvantage is going to be cost, of course. When you talk about technology, usually if you say technologically, can I do a thing? The answer is going to be yes. The question is, can you do it at a cost that is reasonable, at a cost that is competitive? We can do a lot of stuff technologically, but we don't because it's silly. If it costs, I don't know, $1 million to make a candy bar, why would you do that? That kind of thing. So the cost of launching rockets into space is coming down. Starlink and SpaceX and all of these companies. Now Amazon is getting into the space world with, what is it? Blue Origin, I think is the name of their business. Anyway, so the cost is realistically coming down, but it's still super expensive. They were talking about, if you look at this chart that I got, I think it was from NASA information there, but currently it still looks like, well, they're estimating around $400 a kilogram $400 per kilogram to get stuff into space. That's down significantly from 5 or 6 years ago when it was about $1,500 per kilogram, but it's not going to go down to zero. It's not an exponential fall off. And let's say it settles in at about $200 per kilogram. Well, 1 kilowatt, they're estimating, is about 1 kilogram. As far as just the solar stuff, that doesn't count the transmission and all of that. So there were some estimates of cost here from NASA. The 2024 report said it would initially cost between 12 to 80 times as much. Well, that's a pretty wide range as power generated on the ground, and that the first one's going to cost you at least $275 billion to get that stuff into space. So who's going to fund that? That's a question. Now, the idea is eventually it'll come down, but it's still going to be 50 times, say, as expensive as ground-based solar. And is the advantage? I mean, the question I would ask myself right off, yeah, there's an advantage, 24/7 power. Is that worth 50 times as much? Or could I just simply put twice as big a solar array and a battery, to get the same effect? So that's just practical things. All right. What about repairs? You think it's expensive to send a truck out to swap out a microinverter? Try doing that in space, right? And there's the concern about orbital debris. They're estimating that these solar arrays, NASA estimates it will be penetrated 75 billion times over the 10-year operating period. That obviously these are microparticles, micro whatever's out there, but that's a lot of whacking, that's happening to your solar array. That's like a hailstorm. And there's also the space. We think of space as this inert kind of area, but it's a harsh environment. It's a harsh environment for electronics. They're subject to infrared to radiation, to asteroids, microasteroids, a lot of particulates that are going to be hitting it. And there's a big issue about how you dissipate all of this excess heat that is going to be at that location. You're going to be absorbing this light. It's going to generate heat. And how do you get rid of that heat? Because that's going to be a big issue. You got to shed the heat. So I just point this out because it is a harsh environment. As soon as you put it up there, you're going to have repair issues. So how much is it going to cost you to repair? Well, they figure that every launch to geostationary orbit costs about $200 million. So to just send up one rocket to repair, you got that bill to worry about. So not only is it going to cost you literally billions of dollars to build the thing, but it's going to be millions, hundreds of millions of dollars just to maintain it. And then, if that wasn't enough, what about the receiving station? They actually estimated, and I had to look this up from multiple sources many times, that a 1 gigawatt system would require 50 square kilometers of land to receive that beam, that microwave beam. I mean, 50 square kilometers to receive this. They call these rectennas. To put that in perspective, a 1 gigawatt system of traditional solar takes 1.3 square kilometers. So you're looking at, what is that, 40 times the square footage on land. So if you're worried about, if you're one of those people that says we're taking up too much land for solar, now we're going to do 40 times as much land because it's space-based. I think personally, I don't subscribe to the issue that solar currently takes up too much land. Usually the argument goes, you'll hear this from everyone, especially your uncle at Thanksgiving, that in order to power the United States, we would need a solar array the size of Utah. That's always the kind of thing you get. And my counter to that is, you know what? If everybody wanted to drive a car, we'd need a parking lot the size of Montana. It just doesn't work that way. All these things are not located in one spot. You put them on top of houses, you put them on top of other places, they're distributed. I again personally feel like large systems like this, the utility scale solar, this is a bridge technology. It's a bridge technology to true distributed energy. Why on earth are you still following a centralized model when we have the technology to truly distribute it? And much of that is because the guys who are building this stuff are utilities, and that's their model. So they want to maintain large centralized power systems. But eventually we'll grow past that. Eventually we'll grow to a true distributed system. But so think of these as a bridge technology. Hopefully they won't be rusting hulks out in the field when their time is done, and we'll figure out a way of disposing of them properly. But it's still that. All right. So then there are environmental concerns. I don't know if all of these are considered environmental concerns, but I packaged them in that. One is that in order to build a single solar array in outer space, it will take at least 100 launches to get all the bits, all those microwave, for one of those microwave systems. That's a lot of CO2 emissions. That's a lot of carbon expelled out into the atmosphere. If your whole purpose here is for clean energy, you're wasting a lot of that goodwill in the construction of it. That's an issue. Space debris, you're putting a heck of a lot of stuff up there. Uh, you know, it's potential space garbage. We talk about solar here on land, about how do we dispose of it when its useful life is over? Well, how do we dispose of all that nonsense up there when its useful life is over? If it's damaged, if it just wears out, is somebody going to send somebody up there to gather it up? My guess is no. So you've got space debris. And then health effects of microwaves, right? If you're beaming microwave energy down over a large 50 square kilometer range, I mean, it's got to do something. I don't care what they say, that it's not like the noonday sun. That I don't trust it, right? I don't trust what it's going to do to the environment, to people, to birds, to the atmosphere. When you start cooking the atmosphere like that. Um, is this system visible at night? Are we going to be are we creating stars up in the sky? What if the beam wanders? What if that targeted beam is 1 degree off, or half a degree off, or a millionth of a degree off? All of a sudden, those microwaves aren't hitting where they're supposed to be hitting. They're all of a sudden right in New York City, or who knows where. So that seems to me a realistic concern, that these beams are going to be wandering, or have the potential of wandering. And then we get down to just practical efficiency. Our solar arrays are getting more and more efficient all the time. Well, to convert sunlight to DC electricity, then to microwaves, then back to DC electricity, and then to AC compatible current, then they're saying that the author of this was article, and I couldn't find anyone really disagreed, this 11% efficiency end to end is going to be hard to improve upon in any significant way. So if we're dealing with a very expensive system that has maybe a potential, who knows, let's just be generous and say a maximum theoretical potential of 20% efficiency, not so great. Not so great. Um, So, what about lasers, right? I mentioned microwaves, and just think microwaves very far out in space, beaming very low intensity beams down to Earth over a very broad area of land, 50 square kilometers. Well, laser beams, whole different world. Laser beams, they're anticipating these are smaller systems in an array of some sort beaming tightly compacted lasers down to Earth to a receiving station. All right, so what are the pros of that? Well, relatively low cost, according to NASA, the Department of Energy here, in the 500 million to $1 billion range. So that's government talk for low cost, apparently. But that's for a single laser satellite going up there. They have lower costs, lower risks. They can be assembled on the Earth, then sent up into space. The smaller diameter laser beam would make it simpler and cheaper to implement on the ground. You're not needing these great, huge receivers. Now, another advantage they didn't add, but I did, was you could alter its target location. You can adjust where this laser is going. And it could be, and I can see a practical application for this, is if you've got a mobile unit, and we're talking primarily about troops, but maybe let's just be generous and say, a natural disaster, and you need to move, you can move a receiver to receive this energy. For example, in warfare, a lot of the logistical issue is getting fuel to the location where you need it. Well, this could be done remotely, and you could be sending fuel in the form of these laser beams down to the receiver to fuel the forward troop movement. Okay, I'm dancing around that because really, it's a military weapon. Let's stop pretending. I mean, this is a military weapon posing as a civilian application. I mean, that's really what we're dealing with here. When you're talking about space lasers, I mean, this is like Star Wars stuff. So there is the issue of these lasers drifting. They're saying, what about blinding or weaponization here? And even NASA agrees on this. And they would also, these lasers do have trouble getting through clouds and rain. Well, wasn't this the whole point of space-based power? To avoid the issue of clouds and rain, and yet these lasers have trouble penetrating clouds and rain. I mean, really? So I just don't see this. I guess my take on it is it's technically possible and dumb. That's kind of where I'm coming from. The people who are investing money in it is the military, very clearly. I mean, the military always wants the high ground, right? So they can see the benefits, space-based lasers, pure weaponization, how we're going to be in a space race. The Chinese, that they're marketing it as energy, pure energy for the masses. But our military's freaking out about that. What if the Chinese have a space laser, could target anywhere on Earth? What if the Japanese? What if the Indians? What if whoever, the Russians? So this is a space race. That's where the money's coming from. It will have civilian applications for sure, but really the motivation, I think, for any investment in this is weaponization of space, not something. And I guess as an industry, somebody who loves the concept of solar, I would hate to be used as the military's beard, right? We don't want to be uh, let's pretend this is a civilian application when it really is weaponization. So I'll throw that open. We got a few minutes to discuss, but has anyone been thoroughly offended by what I've said here? Um, I sure hope so. So Anybody got, I see some comments there, no cap on money in the military, things like that. Yeah, that's unfortunately, they got deep pockets.
Can
So,
you get me, Jay?
yep, I got you.
Well, you've at the end hit on the true application of this in terms of desirability by big government. The other drawback, though, and I agree with you completely, um, is that these space stations producing whatever energy they can also become targets. And if they're targets, and we have the technology, or any government has the technology to manufacture, mount, produce, and utilize these things, another government's going to have the technology to shoot them down, and that's just another way to leverage politics and military. So you're spot on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dennis. Any other
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that the argument of 24/7 energy is moot because we do have 24/7 sunlight on planet Earth.
Mhm.
So all we need to do is redistribute it. And I've always thought about having a supraconductor or a very large conductor around planet Earth, maybe through the Bering Strait, Western Europe, through Iceland, Greenland, Canada. And now you have 24-hour sunlight.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think we can even not even with distribution, but if we can harvest ultraviolet light,
Okay.
then we can get through clouds. So the weather issue is not an issue. If we can get into the infrared electromagnetic spectrum, then we could be harvesting, infrared radiation that is remnants of the Big Bang. I mean, there is radiation hitting our planet at all times. We've just limited our solar technology historically to the visible light spectrum. So if we expand out to the edges of that, and we are seeing some of that development taking place, we could very soon be at 24/7 energy harvesting without having to send these things up into space. I think that's a more realistic goal than perhaps, Star Wars. Peter, you had a comment?
On a second, Siggy's idea of either a conducting band around the Earth or at least across the U.S. to spread out the availability of electricity, regardless of if it's just before or just after sunset. And at some point in a generation or two, it could actually circle the Earth.
Yep.
I think that's something worth pursuing, at least looking at the numbers to see what volume of metals and cost would be involved.
Yeah.
Well, we already in the US, we already have what do we have? 4 hours time shift, and then we have maybe let's say 10 hours of sunlight. So we've already got 14 hours. So we need to already worry about another 8.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we get the other 8 from? So we either get them from Greenland, Iceland, Europe, or we get them from Russia.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that's very viable. And, I always like to tell people when they argue about solar or wind, and they say, well, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And I always say, well, yes, it does somewhere. Somewhere the wind is blowing mighty Casey, right? So there are always better alternatives. It's sort of like when we talk about solar shingles, for example, or things like that. You say, what is the problem this is hoping to solve? And are there better ways of solving that problem? So if the problem is intermittency of energy, there are probably less expensive and better ways of solving that intermittency issue than sending something 22,000 miles into outer space. That seems to be that would be, I think, further down my list of alternatives, like battery storage seems like a good idea. I mean, we have plenty of sunlight. It just comes at inopportune times. So storage is a good step as well. Any other comments there?
Fusion,
Oh, fusion, fusion. I hear
30
that.
years.
30 years. Yeah, that's, oh, you and hydrogen, right? It's always in the future, right? We do have fusion, and we have a fusion reactor. It's just 90 million miles away. So, you
Little
know,
comment, Jay.
yeah, go ahead.
Just like nuclear, it's really the nuclear energy is the happy face for warfare. And this looks like just about the same thing. I can't see any application where they spend so much money for something that might not work. You know, they have those solar towers where they have the mirrors project onto a tower. There's actually some that are working right now. But they too have problems with the environment where birds fly through and they get burnt up. So I can imagine what would happen with these things.
Yeah, you're talking about concentrated solar, and I know there's one, has been one in the southwestern U.S. I believe it was the only one working here in the U.S. And I think I just read, and I'm going by memory here, that they closed that down. So yeah, someone says Ivanpah. Yeah, just if someone can verify that, or if they know, I think that was decommissioned. I think so. We really, it's
Hmm.
more of a concept that didn't work. Not if not affordably. It works, but it's just not affordable. So, all right. Any other comments?
Can I speak?
Yeah, go for it.
So I was recently in Iceland. As many of you may know, all their power, 305 megawatts, comes from geothermal. But in the distance from the power plant, there was a quote direct air capture CO2 removal plant, and the name of which is climeworks.org. And I'm pleased to have discovered that they're building a rather large one in Louisiana. And I assume, I don't know what the requirements for. I mean, clearly there's a great source of CO2 in the air, but you got to put it underground, and it may well be that the geological formation in Louisiana favors that. Anyway, you can see a CAD rendering. Incidentally, it'll probably come online in 2026. Um, just go to climeworks.com and you can see the information about it. And it's also true, many of you may have heard that we need a humongous number of these to make a significant drawdown in the CO2 concentration. Thank you very much.
Okay, doke. Thanks. Thanks. Ralph, you got a question, or you? I see.
Comment on the geothermal. There's a Canadian drilling technology that sort of a derivative of directional drilling. They just completed a project in Germany to tap geothermal. It's just been completed, and they're testing it and looking at the feasibility in other areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I guess personally, and I know I've noted it here before, that to my way of thinking anyway, as we begin harvesting solar, the interesting statistic that I've always found fascinating is that all of the fossil fuels that have ever existed on planet Earth represent 3 days of sunlight. So it's the stored energy equivalent of 3 days of sunlight. And we are now, we have had the benefit of about 150 years since the Industrial Revolution of harvesting half of that fossil fuel reserve and turning it into economic activity. So for 150 years, we've seen unparalleled economic activity by harvesting a day and a half of sunlight. Now we're beginning to harvest actual sunlight. So our economic opportunity is astounding. I really believe that energy over the coming decades will be the least of our concerns when it comes to resource management. Everything else is limited. The only resource we have that on planet Earth, the only resource we have on planet Earth that comes from off of planet Earth is energy. So everything else is finite. Everything else will be precious and more expensive and difficult. We're always going to be dealing in those escalating costs. Energy should be like computing. Every year it gets cheaper and more abundant. So some idea like space-based lasers, that's coming from us from a perception of scarcity. How do we harvest more and more and more when we really should be coming at the world of energy from a perception of abundance? We have plenty. Now, how do we best manage it? And I think hopefully we should all be doing that in our daily lives anyway, in everything. But unfortunately, we're still just one second away from being gorillas walking across the savannah plain in the even evolutionary scale. So, they shouldn't have given us these toys to play with. We're not ready. So that's
Hey,
okay.
Jay.
Yeah, go ahead. Woo, there's an image.
Sorry. So we have undersea cables for communications between the continents. Is there anything similar like that for power, or is that even feasible?
Yeah, I
'Cause
think
it's
that gets to what Siggy was talking about, is some sort of conductive network or ring or whatever. I'm not aware that they're running power lines under like they are with communications, but just because
I read that the UK is actually buying solar power from Morocco, and that's an actual thing. And they're laying a high voltage DC maritime or ocean cable literally from the UK to Morocco. So there are some examples for that.
Mhm.
cool. All right. I missed your comment. Thanks.
Uh-huh. Okay, doke. All right. Well, let's have one more if anybody has it. Otherwise, I'll give you about a second. And
I got a
okay.
comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nope, I got a second. Hey, on this on the microwave concept that you just told us about, how, wouldn't that make sort of a hole in the atmosphere?
You know,
How does that affect the atmosphere? I mean, you got this going through there.
I think you're highlighting the issue that I guess I was alluding to, is I don't trust them when they say everything's fine. In fact, it took me like 10 years to finally make popcorn in a microwave oven because I figured it was going to do something to my brain. So, it feels like it should be doing something that we don't want. That's I guess where you're coming. So I think I don't disagree with you there, Tim. I think it's a bad idea on multiple levels. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for your attention, and we'll call it a day, and we'll see you all next Tuesday. All right. Take care. Bye bye.